Hello, everybody. Good evening. Aaron Glass, Professor of Cultural Anthropology and Associate Chair of Research Programs here at Bard Graduate Center. On behalf of our director, Susan Weber, I'm thrilled to welcome you all here to this year's installment in our annual series, Indigenous Arts in Transition, which I program with my faculty colleague, Ivan Gaskell. Here at Bard Graduate Center, we study cultural histories through their material traces and the complex ways in which decorative arts, design, and material culture mediate our own relationships with the past in the present. We do this work cognizant of our own location in space and time. Here in the heart of Lenape-Hoking, the ancestral territories of the Lenni Lenape people and a past, present, and future home and gathering place for Indigenous peoples from around the world. We're also one block away from the former site of Seneca Village, a community of African-American and immigrant property owners that was forcibly relocated to create Central Park. Tonight, I'm honored to welcome our distinguished panel of speakers, which I'm blocking your view of at the moment, to address the extraordinary exhibition mounted in this room with us, which centers a contemporary weaving called Sky Blanket at the center of an expansive network of social, material, ecological, and cosmological relations spanning geographic space, genealogical time, and multiple media. Our speakers are part of a multi-year collaborative project to explore the complex connections between Indigenous weaving traditions, digital technologies, and industrial textile methods. Since we have so many panelists, I'm just going to introduce each very briefly so we can get on with it. And maybe everyone can just raise your hand as I mention your name. Maybe I'll just step to the side here so you can see everybody. Meghann O'Brien, Jaad Kuujus, the maker of Sky Blanket, is a weaver of Haida and Kwakwaka'wakw descent, known for her innovative approach to the customary art forms of basketry as well as raven's tail and chilkat textiles. Andy Everson, Negedzi, is an artist and community researcher with Comox and Kwakwaka'wakw ancestry, who worked with Meghann and fellow artist Simeon on the original design for Sky Blanket. Kate Hennessy is associate professor, filmmaker, and anthropologist of media at Simon Fraser University's School of Interactive Arts and Technology, where she works closely with museums and directs the Making Culture Lab. Hannah Turner is an anthropologist and assistant professor in the School of Information at the University of British Columbia, where she focuses on critical information studies, material culture, and the colonial legacies of museum documentation. Doenja Oogjes is a design researcher in the field of human-computer interaction and an assistant professor in the Department of Industrial Design at Eindhoven University of Technology in the Netherlands, where she is part of the Crafting Wearable Senses Lab. So many cool labs. Our moderator for tonight's conversation is BGC alumna Laura Allen, curator of Native American art at the Montclair Art Museum and a scholar of critical and collaborative museology and historical, modern, and contemporary Indigenous art. Please join me in welcoming all of our guests tonight.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I wanted to just begin by thanking you, Aaron, for catalyzing this wonderful experience and for the rest of the BGC team and all of the collaborators on stage and off that have contributed to making this a reality. So for those of you who didn't get a chance to come in and see these incredible works and read the labels, I just wanted to give a brief introduction into what you're seeing here. This is a remarkable series of works by Meghann O'Brien, working with a number of collaborators. These works were created at different times, and they all have a relationship that you can see visually, and you'll hear more about as we talk today. Sky Blanket here was a work created in 2014, woven by Meghann over a 2-year period. She worked with Andy Everson here and Simeon to develop the design iconography, and we'll be hearing a bit more about this work. On the screen that the mountain goat is now joining us on was a work a digital work that derived from Sky Blanket called Wrapped in the Cloud, and that emerged from this wonderful collaboration that we'll be also talking about tonight, where data points from Sky Blanket were digitally analyzed, and through techniques of photogrammetry and 3D modeling of the underlying structure of Sky Blanket was presented as a video that we are not showing right now, but we can bring it back up on screen as we leave. And then an instance from the 3D digitization process was then rematerialized to produce this incredible piece called Untitled, which was just completed. And this work was produced on a TC2 loom, industrial prototyping loom, a very different process from the hand weaving that Meghann created Sky Blanket with. And it takes an instance from Wrapped in the Cloud, rematerialized into a new form. And this brings up so much productive territory in terms of talking about relationships between works. You're going to hear a bit more about the inspiration for this series and the productive opportunities that it has brought through this very collaborative and rich process. So I wanted to, before we really begin, I wanted to say that the three works that you see here, two of them, Wrapped in the Cloud and Untitled, will also be shown next week at Textile Arts Center in Park Slope, Brooklyn. We will have a replica of Sky Blanket as a printed image. The original is only showing tonight. But if your friends or colleagues would like to continue to see more of the exhibition, please come to Textile Arts Center to see that for the next week. That'll be up from April 13th through the 20th. And then Meghann will be speaking on the closing day on the 20th remotely from Paris. So there'll be more opportunity to hear from Meghann. All right, so let's start talking about some of the central ideas in this remarkable series. There's a key concept called transmediation that these works demonstrate. Simply put, the transformation of a work between different media over time. And one of the interesting dialogues we've had here about over the past couple of months is thinking about this not being a situation of replicas. This is not one piece becoming replicated. It's much, much more than that. And so I'd love to hear a bit from you all about what that term means. I know, Meghann, when we were talking about this the other week, we were discussing the title of the show, Everyone Says I Look Like My Mother, and the idea of the works being a genealogy of sorts. So thinking about that transmediation in terms of relationships between these objects. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about how you're thinking of that word and the descendancy here.
Yeah. I have a really bad habit of backtracking to talk about things that I'm asked about. But the one thing I wanted to emphasize a bit about I think a really important thing that I consider a lot in my own practice about when I work with deciding to make a work is the reason it's going to be here. And for me, I found a lot of grounding as this piece. It was touring for quite a while to different museums after I finished it. It was danced once at the Billerud Gallery, and then it kind of just left, and I didn't really have it for 3 or 4 years because it was just being shipped from place to place for exhibits. And the reason that the Wrapped in the Cloud came about was because my friend and curator Jamie Isaac wanted to tour with her Border X show across Canada for another 3 years, and at that point it would be almost a decade where the piece would be gone. So that I was like, I can't do that. Our family was having a feast, a hithigwila for my niece, and my granny's in her 80s, and I kind of wove it with her in mind for a smaller person, or like she's the matriarch of our clan or our family, and yeah. So for me, when we ventured into this idea, because Jamie Isaac had the idea to, well, what if we made a 3D printed version of it so it could stay in the exhibit? That was I was like, that's a brilliant idea. Let's do it. And I think where the transmediation aspect comes for me. So I feel really confident going into making a replica was the original intent, because of the reason that we're doing it, which is so that the original could come home and be used in ceremony. So for me, I guess the transmediation aspect is it could be a replica, but I find that there's an element of surrendering to the process and to the techniques and the media or the people you're working with that allows it to become something else, to transform, to give up some control over what it's going to be, because I've been really grounded in my practice with traditional weaving. So as we were going, I mean, this has been a lot of years of working with it. It began to feel like, it's not we started using the term like descendant works of art, and to kind of expand on that, it's works that, like, as it's unfolded from this original piece, I feel that the spirit has been carried to new works, which are like reflective of the time that they're in, that we're in today. And I've had a lot of resistance personally to that, because my practice as a weaver has been a real reaching back and wanting what my ancestors had. And yeah, that's like a tough thing to come to terms with, that, there's elements of it here, but it's not here, and we're born where we are, and we can pull those threads back as best we can, but yeah, sorry, I'm emotional. But yeah, our people have been through a lot of stuff, so it's a neat thing. And the title, Everett says, "It look like my mother," is like, it's that idea. I titled that with in mind. My mom has told to me sometimes that she thinks the weaving came from her, through our bloodline, and was dormant for a number of decades. There was no weavers in our family for a while, but yeah, that idea of relationship, that you look like your mom, but you're not your mom, and you can't. It goes on, life goes on. So, sorry, that's all I got to say. Like, maybe somebody else can talk a bit better.
Thanks, Meghann. Maybe I'll just start by saying we also have Rhys Muntean here. Rhys was heavily involved in the photogrammetry process, which led to the creation of Wrapped in the Cloud. And I don't know if it's possible to put one of the still images up behind us or not, or the video itself, just for a minute while we talk about it. But also Conrad Sly is a digital artist who worked with us to create the animation, right? To work through those states of digital transformation through photogrammetry and all the hundreds and hundreds of photographs that led to the creation of the digital model. And I think something that was really exciting for us as a group, as we were trying to decide how it could transmediate or how it could transform, was looking at the different moments of transformation. Oh, that you are not seeing behind you. Okay, as we work through the creation of the digital model. And then we realized that the process of seeing a kind of morphing from one state to another was really resonating with what we've been talking about around the creation and the ideation and the design of Sky Blanket, and something that Andy and Meghann spoke so eloquently about yesterday. Was it yesterday? So seeing those transformations, seeing connecting the way that the digital model looked to landscapes, thinking about mountains, thinking about clouds, allowed us to have those kinds of far-reaching conversations. Also thinking about how computation that was required to create the digital model was taking place in the real and metaphorical cloud. So thousands of people participated in creating software that was required to do massive amounts of processing, and which ultimately had a deep connection to water systems, cooling server farms, and this was all part of the making of this digital work. So I think that the transmediation became something that we were very interested in trying to represent in this piece that was going to replace Sky Blanket on exhibit. And it was important that that process could do a kind of work that the original blanket might not be doing in the same way. So that was a starting point for transmediation. I think it became quite a productive and critical space for thinking about what transmediation could be as a way to move forward into different possibilities like the untitled robe here.
Yeah, I'll just say too, like thinking about the institutional context of replicas and where the history of that comes from the extraction of things from land, especially on the Northwest coast, from weavings and other material culture or belongings. And I think moving away from those ideas, I think is kind of something to look forward to, at least where it's not just replicas that exist in collections necessarily, but some more productive sort of future thinking around, cultural transmission. Yeah.
And there's more to say around the idea of the descendant, because, if you want to pick up on descendants, this is something that Meghann has expressed so beautifully around ideas of, DNA, spirit, ways that, the physical information that was used to, document and capture Sky Blanket is transformed into this video. And those same ways of thinking about the work carry through into this work, which also has, very importantly, hand-woven mountain goat wool in it as well.
Well, I think that maybe we could segue to thinking about how the idea of ancestors and descendancy is represented here in Sky Blanket originally as it's a wonderful lead-in to what you've done with this time-based evolution of these works. So maybe Meghann and Andy could talk a little bit about what we're seeing in this original blanket.
Sure. Yeah, yesterday we talked a little bit about it, but briefly, I guess I talked mostly about mountain goat wool yesterday and the original inspiration for it, which was basically a representing kind of less a linear view of time and more of a circular view of time, or the dissolution in your experience of linearity in timelines. So there are three ancestor faces. For me, originally they were representing this experience I'd had, but of the past, present, and future becoming connected visually through art. Basically, that there's this level of communication occurring between generations that never meet each other and can talk to each other, but the work of our ancestors, we can go into the museum collections or in pieces that are handed in a family down, and there's this communication that's really beautiful going on in the physical through objects. So the past, present, and future, I had layers of meaning adding onto what those three faces represented, particularly after weaving the first face. I had a really strong sense of ocean, and I just felt like it looked like something a being rising out of the ocean. And that prompted the desire to have them represent ocean, earth, and sky, past, present, and future, ancestors, us living and descendants, also my three teachers, my three sisters. So a lot of layered meanings in that. And then I had, because of this relationship to time that happened with working with mountain goat wool, I started thinking about the weaving itself, kind of remembering some concepts I'd heard throughout my life, just of a stitch in time or the fabric of time, woven and sewn in time was one exhibit I was a part of. There was an exhibit called String Theory in Australia, I believe, and there's this like kind of unspoken relationship with space and time and weaving. And then I learned a little bit about the theory of relativity, that space and time are woven. And so I wanted to I ended up using this like patterning cut to kind of represent the atomic level, and that really we're all the same. So the diamonds pattern is all throughout it. And kind of for my personal representation of it is just representing like infinite universes, like macrocosm and microcosm, because inside the faces is the smaller diamonds. And I think that's all. The lightning pattern I feel like is really important too, just like the duality.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the three faces, the central face is a female. It has a labret, with the Haida in the north of us, and where Megann's from, her matrilineal lineage comes from. There's a labret to show that it's a female energy in the middle, and the other two don't have that. So when I look at that, I kind of see a little bit of self-reflection in there, and see myself in the bottom with the face paint, because that's how I paint my face, and I see Jay a little bit in the top, kind of this kind of connection to the ones that helped design it, and Meghann, of course, in the middle of it all. And the reason I think that the pieces that join the faces on the outside, it's to show that you don't have to go linearly through those different phases. You can kind of bypass that, and that was one way that I think we were able to portray that. And when we were talking about the lightning design, it's like this. We talk about this thin veil between worlds, and so that's kind of that veil between them. When we were originally talking about the black, which ends up being the sky, and if you were to flip this upside down, chilcat blankets are kind of in the shape of our houses, and so it kind of makes sense when you flip it upside down, and you've got the sky on that side. We were talking about incorporating stars into the design, and when I walk into the room and see this piece, I see a complete star field, and it's kind of amazing that it's kind of gone through that journey of us talking about it, and it never became fully actualized as a star field in the hand woven piece, but it's become completely a star field over here, this piece, and I think that's quite fascinating.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I was going to ask about the metaphor and representation of stars throughout the series, because I know that the Pleiades constellation was also a part of the inspiration. So perhaps I think it would be interesting to hear about how the data points from this robe made it to this constellation and made it even further to this representation of stars, because that was definitely part of the thinking, right?
Well, I wonder, I can talk a little bit more about the digital modeling process, but
Great.
I don't know if you want to start with Pleiades, maybe Andy or Meghann, or should I just go ahead? Just give us some significance before I get into that, maybe.
Yeah, during yesterday, I kind of showed a few of our messages going back and forth talking about the design of this, and one of the things that we kept bringing up was Pleiades, and how we believe our ancestors say that we came from there. And my great grandfather he was blind at the time, and he used to get my mom to go outside at night, and he couldn't see anything, but he would ask her where a certain star was, and she'd point, and then he would know where Pleiades was, and he said that's where our people are from. And that was one of the stories that I shared with Meghann during the development of this design, And we really wanted to kind of incorporate it very kind of a little more in your face, but the face paint is actually representative of the sea otter hunters that there's a certain time of the year that my grandma says that our people would go out and look up to the sky, and there'd be the stars would light up across the sky and go to the Pleiades. And if you were able to catch that at a certain time of the year, you would have good luck in sea hunting. And so that's the face paint that they wore when they did that. And so I wanted to have that kind of visual connection to the way that we paint our faces in reference to Pleiades.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, it's so interesting to hear you talk about it again. It's so neat. Yeah, so we worked with a digital modeler and Reese, who we talked about before. Originally, Meghann and Jamie came to us. You mentioned 3D printing, and very excitedly at the beginning, we were like, "Oh, let's 3D print Sky Blanket." And I had been working with Kate in the lab as a postdoc, and was doing some experimentation with Reese and 3D scanning and printing, and quickly came to realize it's not a very not that it's not easy to use as a technology, but it doesn't actually do what we wanted it to do in terms of a handheld scanner. Maybe you've seen some of these. And 3D printing involves a lot of plastic. At least it did when we began this. And thinking about material relations, and it's been really important to think about materials. I think it became clear we weren't going to produce a plastic sky blanket that would eventually melt. If anybody works in museum conservation, they know what happens to plastics pretty quickly. So at any rate, what you're seeing in Wrapped in the Cloud is all of the different kinds of digital articulations that our designer, Conrad Sly, needed to do to make it appear as if you're seeing a 3D object on a 2D screen. That resulted from thousands of photographs. Reese is taking one now. It's kind of meta. And of a sky blanket. This is what we call the beauty pass. This is sort of the final 3D object where, yeah, you can see it looks like a rendering of sky blanket almost exactly. And to get to this model, you need to define things like light and texture and all of these other aspects of digital modeling, which are used in, game design and architecture and all this kind of stuff. So when we were seeing these images, and I don't know, Megan, if you want to talk about this, seeing some of the wireframes, which will come up, or the cloud points, which is what we're seeing Sky Blanket blend into now, was resonant with a lot of these ideas that you've just talked about. And I think it was kind of exciting to see some of when the wireframe, we saw the first images of the wireframe. I remember you said, "Oh, it's like mountains." And just these visual metaphors in the way that Conrad was thinking about his work and his materials as opposed to the kinds of work you were doing with weaving. So yeah, that's what you see. There's different versions of grayscale, and the very colorful fluorescent normal pass, as it's called, will pop up. Yeah, so and the Pleiades are glowing in the background at some point as well, which is a flare we added as well.
I think it would be, I want to get back to Mountain Goat, but I think now that we're on this path, let's talk about how this, or an instance of this, became what we're seeing here.
Yeah, I can talk about that. I'm wondering if we can get some of the slides up of the work on the TC2 loom for that. But yeah, basically the TC2 loom is a jacquard loom, which means that it's very different from the loom that the blanket was woven on. But the threads are individually threaded through heddles, and then every heddle can be lifted. And then based on that, you create a shed, which is the separation of yarns through which you throw a yarn carrier, and that's how you weave the separate rows. And a jacquard loom is able to lift these individually. So here in the files you create for that are bitmap files. So every pixel relates to a yarn either staying up or down. And so here we were trying out different patterns just to see how they would translate. I think the technique was completely different because of the nature of it going up and over a yarn rather than twining or braiding, for example. So there was a lot of sampling and testing to see what could actually be done and what kind of qualities would come out of that. And yeah, we tried a couple of different of the stills, also samples of it, so shorter sections. And then I think when we started weaving the Pleiades pattern, it just immediately spoke to all of us. It was just this moment, and so we decided to weave that as a full piece on the TC2 yarn loom. Yeah.
So this is the loom?
This is the loom. Yeah, that's right. And yeah, here you see some earlier tests. It really allows you to weave quite quickly in comparison. And yeah, like I said, it's meant as a prototyping loom, so there's this real back and forth to working on your files in Photoshop and then weaving it and then adjusting your files and going back. So there's this quick dialogue that can happen there. But then, yeah, for me, this was the biggest piece that I've ever woven on the TC2 loom, because it wasn't ever really developed for creating full pieces in that way. So that was very exciting. Yeah.
Well, okay, now let's talk about mountain goats, because they are integrally involved in this project and physically represented in Sky Blanket as well as Untitled. So let's go back. I have a still from a video that Meghann had created. Well, it's a little blurry, but this is her processing the mountain goat pelt that eventually became wool that was used in this project. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how mountain goat inspired this entire series and your process.
I'm not entirely sure where to begin with that exactly, but without re-going over everything. It's actually not used a ton in this piece. Like I was sharing with somebody earlier about it, that early in my practice, I feel like the part of like the mountain goats, the work that I did with it is it resulted in me to being a person who probably still have elements of this, but really, really, really tight and holding on and gripping and measuring when I wove my first pieces, like measuring, like making sure everything was straight and just working with the mountain goat wool. It made me soften and loosen, and in order to be able to spin it, I had to become more like it. If that makes sense, its energy became a part of my energy. It had a really big healing quality for a lot of even my relationships to mountains. I had a lot of history in mountains, and it healed some of my like egoic attachments that I was playing out in there in my early years. But essentially, like when I was working with that material, really considering the entire animal and its spirit and how it's deconstructed and then reconstructed by our people into these robes, ceremonial robes. I felt like there was such a supernatural quality to our ancestors who made these pieces, and that they're incredibly, that part of the process is so not understood. And I guess like in a way, having engaged so deeply and intimately with like one thing, I feel like anything in the world you could pick that you could go that far into with it would probably get you to the same kind of place, which is like an awe and wonder of like how things are created everywhere around us and we take for granted. And a lot of the times we're disconnected in our society from process and how things are made. And we're just given the final thing, like, and we with our language categorize what that thing is and put it into boxes, you know. And this was just like an unfolding of like so much beauty. So for me, it's been a little bit heartbreaking in some ways when you make something that like comes from this place of like intimate connection with something that's transformed you, and then it's somebody's like, oh, it's so like nice and like looks good or something, you know. Like the aesthetic aspect. So I think that the thing that I've found really liberating in this process of it changing from this piece to an animated version to this piece is that, like, when it was first shown in museum spaces as an animation and explained that it's replacing an original, I found that it brought up more conversations that I was excited about having, like about the reasons why our people wove, like, rather than it being like a pretty thing, it enabled an entrance point for people to start asking questions that I think lead to better places. And I think that's like when we're talking about museum replicas, I think there's an enormous amount of stories to be told about the way that our people interact with objects and things and view the world and each other, that if they are repatriated, like, to our people, it's not like you're left with an empty space. You can open a conversation creating new works that can tell a bigger story than this. Like, it's almost like the way that those pieces were used and cared for by our people, and like they have this amazing energy in them. And I think all artists on the Northwest Coast really seek to understand what that energy is and why those pieces are so powerful. And maybe we don't get there entirely through just trying to get the aesthetic of what it looks like, because there is like this immaculate like energy and perfection and like natural quality to them all. But yeah, I guess it's been really satisfying for me to have, because the wool that I spun back in 2010 has been used in a couple small projects, but there's like, I feel sometimes really sensitive to the work, and to see, using the mountain goat wool from that project to seal this piece is essentially has rows of mountain goat wool twining almost all around it. And then it's got 5 rows of yellow that's dyed with wolf moss. I don't know why something so foreign that I didn't make, and that's like from another tradition with a jacquard loom, can feel like it's a real blanket to me, but I feel like it needs to be danced and yeah, I feel like it's being in that piece, like something about taking apart something that's partially kind of like, it's not machine woven because Doenja wove it, but it's like the digital aspect of it, being in the patterning and stuff, and the mechanized aspects of it. It feels a little bit machine woven to me, but like to engage with that and not, it just felt really healing. And then there's something about the mountain goat wool containing it that feels good, and I don't really understand what that is.
It's still in process, right? And this is the first time that these works have all been together at the same time, and the first time that this has been displayed. And so it seems like there's so many new awarenesses and emotions that are coming about, even in the process of putting this exhibition together, that you'll be reflecting on for months to come. Would anybody like to speak a bit about the evolution of this process together? I mean, you've had this grant to support this digital project and the descendant work of Untitled for 4 years now, right? And it's almost wrapping up. So yeah, I'd love to hear about the collaboration that this is involved and how that's evolved. Even our recent conversations and highlighting some of the things you just spoke about, I think really demonstrate how much of a journey it has been and still will be.
Yeah, I mean, we have had a grant for the last 3+ years, but we actually started in 2017. So that was when Meghann first and Jamie contacted us to think about this idea of replacing or finding a surrogate for Sky Blanket in Border X. But this idea of transmediation and the idea of descendant works and a lot of the ways that we've come to think and begin to write about these works, I think has only been able to emerge because we've had quite a long duration of conversation, collaboration, of meeting, of working together, thinking through different ways of creating works, and having a chance to really reflect on them and talk about them. And Meghann is, I would say, you're driving this process of, raising and articulating what's going on in this process through conversation and reflection, but through your active practice that we've been fortunate to support. Physically and just being able to bring the project forward. So I think in those first moments of Wrapped in the Cloud with Conrad and thinking about language and seeing connections, metaphorical, material connections that we could use to think with has been really important. And then connecting with, and Hannah was there from the beginning, but then connecting with Doenja and being able to actually put into practice things that seemed theoretical. And to try them out and to have access to the tools has been really important. Yeah. No. Okay. Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting to think about some of the opportunities. I mean, we've been talking a lot about the opportunity of being able to have alternate works of Wrapped in the Cloud to be on view while the original robe is either danced in community, so this is a picture of the potlatch feast that the robe was able to be danced by Megan's sister, right? As a result of creating Wrapped in the Cloud. Now translating the works into the digital loom iteration, what type of other opportunities do you see? Are you looking ahead toward and thinking about where this part of the project could go?
I was really excited to kind of like recreate a bunch of pieces that I had woven in this, like in a black and white style, like take all the color out and have like a full set of regalia of like an apron and leggings, things that I had already woven. That was exciting. It's different too. Like I had a really hard time with this piece because it was on the TC2 loom at Emily Carr at Material Matters Lab is where it was. It's warped. It takes them like a tremendous amount of time. I think like 2 weeks to warp it. Is that right? 2 months?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how long people are able to tie knots, but it can take anywhere between 2 weeks
and there's like 400 yards on it that can be used, and so it's used by multiple people. So there's like an element of like I can't control like what materials on there. So I was kind of stuck with black cotton, which I was quite disappointed about. And I don't necessarily know how well it's going to work as fringe. As a danced piece, but I'm curious to see if it does better than I hope. So it remains to be seen if that will be something. And yeah, there's like one thought I want to share with that, but I guess on top of that is like the possibility, I guess, in the new direction of weaving. Okay, there's like a bunch of different tangents there, but one is like through Doenja, we're exploring. I mean, for me as a weaver, it was interesting. It was such a personal process to be removed from it and somebody else weaving a piece, for me. I didn't know how I felt about that. I felt really disconnected from it for quite a while. And now one step further from that is like a completely machine woven piece. So there's like a company in the Netherlands that Doenja is familiar with, where we're talking about possibly having the other 3 versions of Wrapped in the Cloud. So there's the wireframe render, and then the purple one, and the gray one, and then this one, and then so there's 5 of them that could potentially be woven a lot quicker. I was really excited also, like for some reason it felt really good to weave on that piece. So I thought about potentially like hybrid weavings, like one that's partly machine woven, and then myself being able to finish some of the weaving or like design it in a way that some of it's woven by the machine and then some I'm able to do some of my hand weaving on. And I think also a part of this project that I was excited about as a possibility going into it is, you know, this piece was 2 years of me working. I was shocked how long it takes with a huge team of people to result in a physical thing like this. Felt like reinventing the wheel in a lot of ways, because when you learn to weave, you're inheriting like the techniques and the way of doing things that's established by your ancestors over like many generations of perfecting like what we're doing. So there's not a lot of guesswork when you sit down to weave it, even though it takes a long time. But there is, because of the how prohibitive it is in terms of like paying people for a couple of years of work, not a lot of real chilkat blankets are circulating in community. And I've seen like, you know, Andy's regalia is beautiful, like that he paints and has fringe on and it dances, and they're very powerful pieces. But some people I've seen I've even seen photos and exhibits of people in Alert Bay wearing towels with chilkat designs on them, and it's powerful still. Like, you know, and because that's like, I think it was a conversation that we had before once where you shared with me, it's like the right to make something that's important and the physical is recreated, but it's the right to be able to do that. That's the important thing. So when you see like the representation of something as the right, that this I saw as a potential to make like more chilkat blanket style looking on something like this, as a way to have pieces circulating in community more broadly, which I think is still an exciting idea.
Are we at time already? Okay. I think, gosh, we could sit here and talk for a couple more hours. We're going to open it up for questions. Thank you. It's a great place to end on.
Thank you so much for sharing this beautiful and inspiring collaboration, all of you. I am entranced by the fringe on Sky Blanket, and I wondered if you could talk more about fringe and the body, and which you just mentioned briefly, but I also am curious, it seems to have two different twists, the yarn's hanging down, and I wondered about Wrapped in the Clouds, how when it was photographed, it was resting rather than hanging, and how that decision is made. All these questions are swirling around in my mind.
Yeah, the fringe, generally it's thigh spun merino wool, and it's a Z twist, and starts at the top and loops down. So it's woven around for the whole piece of it, and then that's what's left over. But then there's an overlay fringe, is the one that looks like it's a different style, and it's much looser spinning. And if you look underneath it, you can see it a bit better on this one, the rows of yellow. So on all the chilkat blankets, you'll see the overlay fringe has the twining underneath, and it's meant to functionally, I think, kind of contain the fringe, the longer fringe. And when you dance it, the lighter weight, it gets a separation, so it's doing a different thing than the rest of the fringe. If that makes sense, it moves in a different way because it's lighter and it's moving away from the main body of the fringe. And I remember seeing Marcus Alfred dance Raven's Tail robe that I'd woven and had fringe coming out all over the place. And with like a good dancer that knows like what they're doing, it's like he was so like in rhythm with like the song and the beat of the drum, that he would be over here doing something else, and like the fringe was like the energy was over here from his last movement, and it would just like boof, like it was just the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And I was like, my jaw dropped. I was like, oh, that's what they mean when they say like somebody dances like life into these pieces, because I haven't danced a lot myself, but the times that I have danced this piece, I feel the energy of the piece also moving into me and giving me energy, which is really beautiful.
I have two questions. The first is about the mountain goat, and you said that the pelt was used. It's not a shearing process.
No, I used the Chilkat blanket by George Emmons as my guide in doing the processing. So in there it says that the hide side was wet and then rolled to decompose, and then it loosens the fibers, and then they just slide off. So I did that process.
Okay.
We showed a video of it yesterday that is available on my website.
Right.
That you can see the whole start to finish from
Thank you. It's fascinating. The second was you said you felt that it was healing to look at it, and I'm wondering if it's been discussed or if you can imagine using this one as some sort of regalia and dancing it.
Yeah, I would really love to. I would love to use it as regalia. Yeah, and because I saw.
Maybe need to do more fringe.
Yeah, yeah, might be more weighted or yeah.
Thank you. This was very interesting. The very first image you had what looked like 4 points of light. Was that something related to the stars or to something in nature within the tribe? And then I have a second question.
Yeah, there was us bringing in, because instead of just bringing all of the cloud points into it, the Pleiades was a bit central in some of the thinking. So decided to just begin that first stage of it with the Pleiades. So it was just through conversations that Andy and I had. I don't remember actually why we started talking about it originally. I remember it was something around blood though, because I remember I took a bunch of snowboarders through the Umista and did the tour, and he stopped at the Hamatsa regalia and he said our people used to use menstrual blood to dye it, and I was like, what? And I was like, why would they do that? And I through some reading, it was actually some reading that a girlfriend of mine gave. I mentioned it to a girlfriend of mine actually, and it gets into kind of weird witchy stuff, but around the protective powers of blood and how blood was revered and regarded as extremely powerful. A lot of ceremonies even today, in Sweat Lodge, menstrual, if you're on your cycle, you're not allowed in. It's said to be such a powerful time that you're kept away. So I think there was one channeled book that a friend recommended, and they were talking about how our blood reaches forwards and backwards in time and contains all of our lineage. And then you were like, oh, our people said we were from there. I think, yeah, it was some kind of new agey stuff laced in there. Yeah, and old agey. I remember, just as a small side thing too, I had a quartz crystal in my water bottle, and my teacher Willie was talking about it, and I was like, oh, I thought it was so new agey, and he was like, no, your people use them, and there's all these stories. I was like, oh, cool. Yeah.
All right, and the second question had to do with the title. Does the title relate to a specific kind of dance or a specific tale within the culture?
You mean
Yes. No, the walk in the clouds, wrapped in the clouds.
no, it's kind of a bit of a, I guess there was a point in time with the mountain goat wool where I had really felt like I was making clouds, because when you have the drafting process, you end up, I didn't know how to spin yet, so I was coiling the balls up, and they would be about that big, and then you would put it in your hand, and yeah, those are them. But they would be about, I measured it on my kitchen scale, they were about 5 grams each. So there's this element of elation and surprise when you hold it, because it's so light for its size, and I just felt like it was making clouds, and it was as if you could touch a cumulus cloud. And then Kuiawa Jones is a researcher on Haida, and she reached out and shared some really amazing stuff around clouds in her research that she'd found. And there was one thing she shared that was a phrase from, I think it was Swanton in Ethnology of the Haida, and he says that supernatural beings wrap themselves with clouds. And there was references to sky blankets in there, I think so. it seemed like it was fitting. And then, so it's also partly because of the cloud point aspect of the photogrammetry process. Like some of the linguistic overlaps were really exciting for me. I think you have a photo too of it, of the wireframe render when it looked like a mountain range. It's, yeah.
Oh, this one.
Yeah. I remember the first time I saw that one, I was very, very, very excited. So when the cloud points are there, they're just all the dots, and then they're all triangulated. And it was just so exciting, like to see all this like stuff in his process, in Conrad's process. That felt like it had meaning for me.
I think just to follow up, I think the use of the cloud also inadvertently can refer to the digital aspect of this, because when I was helping design the blanket, I was sending it all through the cloud to Meghann, and our discussions were through the cloud. And then, all this other, it started, it had a digital element from its beginning and right through to where it's at now. So
Thanks. I will add to that. Something unresolved too is that, mountain goats, it's sort of, we'll say it started with a goat sometimes, right? They're living in an environment that is being harmed by the massive amounts of energy and the kinds of things that are going on around computing and new technologies. So I think it's important to think it all connected together too. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for the conversation and for the work and for the thought in putting it all together in this way. I'm afraid my own question isn't as well put together, but it's driven by this sort of sense that some of the terminology you've been using to talk about it, on the one hand, it's metaphorical, but on the other hand, it's not. And I find that recurring pattern in the project really compelling. And my question really has to do with the way in which you've landed on certain kinds of terminology. One of the things I love about the project is that it really pushes back against simplistic notions of authenticity in objects, but in indigenous objects in particular, and what the criteria of recognizing, a real thing is. And you've talked about some of the ways in which this is real to you in ways that its machine mediation does not negate. And then I was going back to where you started with genealogy and to think about these pieces as descendant pieces. And I'd love to hear you all talk a little bit about the terminology that you went through, replicas, iterations, versions. I love that you landed on sort of a genealogical terminology. And that's part of the question, is just see if you unpack that kind of development of your own speaking and thinking about the pieces. And the related, as I was listening to you, I was thinking about something that Meghann has written but not said tonight, which was that given the duration of labor, literally hand labor that it takes to create weavings like this, you think of them when they come into the world as kind of being born, being birthed, being beings in the world, and using that biological metaphor of birthing. And I was thinking about then what's the language for thinking about something like this? And is it like IVF? Like what's the what's I mean that's a joke, but maybe it's not. I mean, because it's the technologically mediated, in the labs where you all work, it's the technologically mediated process of bringing something real into life. And so I said that sort of flippantly, but I actually don't mean it flippantly. And so this is another way of just sort of asking to talk about the language that we use to even think about the relationships between these things.
Yeah, I would share partly one thing also that I found really compelling. I think about, I'm trying to remember the origin of where I heard it, but I just have to think for one sec about it. Oh, it was I think it was something that my first teacher, Carrie Dick, told me, and she was like, if you hold on to this piece, my first piece, the art form is meant to go away from you. So if you hold on to it, you're never going to make another one. And so she gave me some really good like lessons I still carry with me in a big way. But there was something along the lines of that where I'm trying to remember the other piece of it, but because I know some cultures, like I know in Tlingit territory, they've got very old pieces that are still held by families. But there was something about letting the piece go, and like maybe it was in my own practice actually that like this drawing back into the earth and into our materials and into our process of doing things, about it changing you, about it being a form of education, and that if we are handed the thing and we never have to undergo the process of making it, that we don't receive those teachings, or if we don't have an oral culture that's intact, we lose them through time and think that they're lost forever. But that our art was regenerated with every new generation. It was essentially remade so that we could receive our form of what I think of as an education, because we didn't have like formalized education, So I think I was thinking about them in that way because it parallels with, we talk about the birth of the robes off of the loom, and then being there. I've heard stories of pieces having their own songs and like really being alive. But I don't know. I guess with this one, I don't really know where that went. It's been such a long number of years of like thinking with things that I feel like my relationship to this piece in particular has grown exponentially in the process of finishing it, of completing it with the material. And I've been really shocked and surprised because I remember when we were doing some of the early, like I was doing those mouse woman leggings, and I tried doing Chilkat with no black line. And it was like, I got this really strong feeling of like, no, like that's not supposed to happen. And like, I listened to that because I think the work is so connected. Historically it was women who wove the pieces and men who provided the design. And I think in my practice at some point too, there was an aha moment of like, these robes contain so much life energy, and life is very, very rarely created by one. So it takes a male and a female component to create life, and it's usually the design, and then the woman, builds the body of the baby in her body. And it said too, like part of the reason that this wasn't woven by me was because I observed some of like the traditional practices of like not weaving and not spinning while I was pregnant with my daughter, because they said that it would tangle the umbilical cord. So there's like this, I feel as though sometimes in like the refined or higher levels of weaving experiences that I've had, that it's something that comes through you, and in the same way that life is created, it's not consciously created, it's an energy, and it's life energy. I think that we use our life energy to create the pieces, and there's like a big relationship there with it. And I don't know about the terminology for that piece because but it does feel like something that's like, it's like a marriage or a hybrid of like, there was something very healing in undoing the parts that I had to undo and reweaving certain parts of it, where I was like looking at it as like, for one, I was like, you machine, like I can weave on you. You think you're so good, you machine. I'm gonna finish this now. Because I like really fine stuff and I like the challenge too, but I even look resentfully sometimes at like, Corey Bullpit has those Chilkat patches that are sold, and I look at them, I'm like, I wonder if I could weave that. Because I like the tiny microscopic stuff a lot. But sorry, that was a long answer, but I'd like to think more about it, so I'm curious.
I do remember driving in the car while the weaving was almost finished, and I was getting text messages. It's almost here. It's coming off the loom soon. And I was like, am I going to make it? So it was like that. One of the things that I was thinking, something that I think this project has allowed us to think through sort of from a new media perspective is, assumptions that are made about work being digital or digitally mediated or not. And I think we all agree none of us can escape digital mediation in all of our day-to-day activities. but also acknowledging that origins of computing do come through jacquard weaving technology and punch cards that led to the first computers. And so the history of weaving is the history of computation. Also, we've really tried to get away from a kind of binary, there's a lot of black and white happening here, but to get away from a binary sense of something being digital or not digital. When it's clear, listening to Meghann and Andy talk about their early process using Illustrator and Photoshop and Facebook Messenger, these works are inherently and always digital, as well as being deeply connected to the materials and to the mountain goat and to the land where the mountain goat lived until it became, an animal that could be used to weave this blanket. So that's, I think, a really important. It's been an amazing opportunity to work through practice and in conversation with Meghann and our team members to be able to use this work to theorize media, to theorize what computation is, and to use some of the linguistic metaphors of the cloud and constellations and points of point clouds to think through what transmediation is, and in doing so to trace the connections that endure. Because for me, there's no question that this is Meghann's artwork that has come through these different states of material and digital digital manifestation.
Yeah, and this, we often sort of say, oh, technology, new technology, but what if we place Indigenous work and collaborative and women's work and weaving at the center of those kinds of conversations? I think that's maybe what these things can question or ask of us, I guess, for me.
Any other questions? Hi. Thank you so much for that. That was so awesome. And my question, sort of building on the genealogical language and the fact that sometimes it seems we're talking about this untitled as sort of like a child. And I was wondering, was there ever just a talk about giving it a title, like naming this child? And would potentially, if digital works were used going forward, would those have actual, titles, or is untitled a title? I don't know. But yes, if y'all could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I felt a little uncomfortable naming it before it was finished. So it was only recently totally finished, I guess, I don't know, Saturday or Friday or Saturday, and then got folded up and put away. But I had it out on my table as it was being finished, and it struck me, Kate and Hannah were asking, have you thought of anything? And I'm just like kind of observing things, and I felt like it had a bit of like a shadow quality or a moonlight quality to it. I felt like there was like a shadow side maybe of like, in personal work, like shady side too of like museum stuff. So shadows and moon energies, and it's actually really cool on the back. It was an unexpected thing that it turned out very like white. The white side of it, the reverse side is really quite neat when you can kind of walk around it. But I did, I briefly thought of naming it Birthday, but I don't know. I took a long time to name my daughter. We had her unnamed for like a month. She was just baby. So I don't know. I'm trying to. It's also because we're considering making versions of the others, and like there's a relationship between these 3 works and then the following works that I'm kind of trying to consider what naming it will, how that will fit in, I guess, within the context of the previous works, because they are related in a way.
We did get to fly through the totality of the eclipse with the blanket from Vancouver. So it
came out in full force.
Yeah, it was in the totality up at 30,000 feet.
From a certain angle, if you look behind it, it almost looks like the what's it called? The corona around the eclipse.
Any other questions? Laura, do you have any other questions?
I did wonder how it feels to be reunited with Sky Blanket after not seeing her for so long.
Feels really good to see it. Yeah, and it's neat. I have a feeling sometimes of seeing pieces that I've made. Usually it's basketry, but seeing it and being like, did I make that? Or like, when did I do that? That has a quality of that, but it's been nice. I feel like I put a lot of like good energy into it while I was working on it. I feel like it's really contained that, and I feel like I receive a lot of grounding and peaceful energy from it as a kind of a distance. I feel more distance from it, I guess, and that's in a positive way.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to end things. Please join me in thanking this wonderful team.